And we're live.
This is Literary Roadhouse. One short story, once a week. I'm Rami.
I'm Anais.
And I'm Gerald.
And this week, we're going to be discussing a story called After the Race by James Joyce. And in this story, the author gives us a snapshot into the life of some friends and acquaintances who are all united and involved in some way with race car driving. And specifically, we're introduced to them immediately after a race in Dublin that had just finished. And they're all in generally good spirits. They frolic around town, join a party where they spend all night drinking alcohol and playing cards until the sun comes up.
Wow. And that's it.
The summary didn't give anything away, which is great. So.
Yeah, I don't like to.
People need
Okay.
to read it.
So
Yeah.
let's start how we always start, with overall impressions. Gerald.
Yeah. Thumbs down. I didn't realise. Just took me a while to realise that thumbs down doesn't work on audio. No, I don't like any of the characters, and you don't have to, but you have to. I don't connect with them at all, and I just thought the story was just a waste of time. Sorry, Rami.
It's okay. No, I'm not a huge fan of it, but I'll elaborate on what made me like it more than I initially did, and maybe that could influence you or not. That's not my goal, but
No, that's all right.
Yeah.
That's why we're here.
Okay. So when I first read it, I was a little bit like Gerald. I was like, I mean, okay, I wouldn't have gone thumbs down, but I didn't love it. And then I had so much fun researching it. So that was exciting. I learned so many things. And then that sort of, I know, the research part was great. And I didn't hate it. There was just a feeling of, like, I get it. But then when I did the research and I got it even more, and then it's like, oh, you have to know, like, Joyce's, like, political leanings in order to fully get this. Then it becomes interesting.
You have to tell us about that.
Well, I know Gerald researched it as well, so. Actually,
Okay,
Gerald,
cool.
that's a great segue. What did you find in your research?
I can't remember now. I think what happens is that when you find out that it is quite the whole. It's part of a series of short stories which makes up a whole body of work called The Dubliners, and the idea was to show that the sort of state of Ireland at the time, and nationalism, and the whole sort of history of Ireland is peppered with what they call the Troubles between the North and the South, and the disagreements and the fights between the nationalists and the Republicans. Anyway, whatever. So yeah, it was. So I didn't. I mean, I didn't do that much research because I didn't see the point. Sorry.
All right, I will bring you to school. All right. So first of all, this was published in 1914, just a few short years before the Irish Independence War, which was 1919 to 1921, and they got independence in 1922. So at the time, there was all of this discussion and debate about Ireland being its own country, and those were the nationalists who wanted that. So it's very pointed that very early on, Joyce in the stories lets you know that the father had moderated his nationalist views. So the calamities that befall this family, there's a little bit of like, that's what you get for not being a nationalist. There's a little bit of like that to it that comes through. And also in Dubliners, there's two themes which occur over and over and over. One is that whenever the English enter the story, you know things are going to go bad for the Irish, which happens in this story because it's all Frenchmen and Irishmen until Ralph shows up, and then he's the one who wins all the money gambling. And from that point forward, it just sucks to be Jimmy. so that happens. And then the other one is this theme of Irish paralysis, which is really interesting, which that theme is, there's several moments where Jimmy knows what's happening to him, where he's like, he's very aspirational. He's like trying to fit in, but he's not really in the group. He like invested most of his money in this French guy's car company. He knows that wasn't wise. He knows he shouldn't be gambling. He knows he's losing, and he keeps doing it. He keeps doing the thing that's hurting him, and he has this complete paralysis when it comes to like getting out of the situation, which occurs over and over and over in Dubliners, which I thought was really interesting. This way in which there's like this critique that Joyce does where he's like, we're doing it to ourselves, fellow Irishmen, which I thought was great. Like I said, I had a lot of fun with the research part of it. And those were the biggest, because Jimmy has that moment of truth where like he realizes what's happening and nothing changes. And I thought that seeing it from that perspective made the story a lot better.
Yeah, I agree. So just to comment on, thank you for pointing out the date that or the year it was written in, because can you believe that this story is over 100 years old? It's crazy.
That is, yeah, that is mad, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, so I agree with Anais that I feel like the story did require quite a bit of reading in between the lines for me to get it, which I don't normally like, but then when I took the time to do it, and then I was like, oh, okay, so this is kind of, you know, what is meant by this, and why the characters might be where they're from, and why the outcome of the story might have happened the way it did. So there's a lot, I guess there's like symbolism that could be missed if you're not as familiar with the context. Normally I don't like to do this, and I initially, even for this story, I just took it at face value and read it based on what was on the surface. But I think because the author was James Joyce, that also kind of influenced me into thinking, no, there must be something more to it, and which led me to, you know, further investigating. And I don't know if I should admit this on the show, but I did use some like study guide helps, like Spark Notes or Cliff Notes. So yeah, if people wanna use that to kind of supplement their reading of the story, I would recommend it because it was helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that my whole problem with that, because yeah, I sometimes, if I don't get a story and I feel like I'm missing something, and then not to make myself look clever on the podcast, I just see, I sometimes use the notes to find out what I've been missing. But the problem I have with that is that the story should stand on its own. If it's a short story, it should be engaging. It should be a complete story from beginning to end. You shouldn't have to think, well, that wasn't very good. Why wasn't it very good? I'll go and read all this other stuff. And now I understand it. That's my issue with it.
But didn't it hold up on its own? So I broke my notes into things I understood before I researched and things that I understood after I researched. And the things that I understood before I researched, that I felt there was enough clues that had this story stand on its own, even without all the political context, is you get the sense of Jimmy's family. They've just come into basically the merchant class. Like they've basically just come into a bit of money. There is an appearance of being wealthier than they are. The dad sends him to Cambridge, where he's just partying all the time. Like this kid is no substance. He can't remember a speech he gave 5 seconds ago on the yacht, right? Like there's a sense in which his family's aspirational, and Jimmy's a little reckless with his money when it makes him look good. Like there's that line where he's like, normally he's really good with money because he knows how hard it is to get, but like also this French guy knows everybody, so maybe I should give him all my money, right? Like there's this aspect of like he just wants to, there's a thing where like the 3 things that excite Jimmy are rapid motion, notoriety, and money. That's what's constantly motivating him throughout the story. So I got that. And there is that sort of comment on like when people come into wealth, the follies of that sometimes. There was that nice line how Dublin wore the mask of capital, and that also applies to Jimmy, the Irishman in the story that we're following. So I thought that was very nice. And by the end of it, he's poor, embarrassed, and he finished last in this race. So that on its own was fine. But I agree that on its own didn't really make me run around being like, oh my God, this story is just like touching on some fundamental truths. It's all the political stuff where I'm just like, oh, Joyce is being like, Irishmen, you did this to themselves, and you have paralysis. Also, the Englishman suck, because look what happens as soon as Ralph arrives. Like, that's the part that makes it really interesting. But I do think it held up on its own without it, even if I didn't love it.
Yeah, as I said at the start, I think my problem with it was that I didn't warm to any of the characters, and that sort of thing disengages me from the whole story, because it was all about the characters. It wasn't about the race or particularly what they did, because it was all sort of money and cash. And I have this sort of chip on my shoulder about rich people and money and stuff. So I sort of instantly disengage. And so I read it and I thought, yeah, so what? And then I did some research and looked into the background. But then I thought it comes back to this thing that it's supposed to be a short story, and to me, even if it's part of a bigger work, it should stand on its own, and it should be a good story on its own. And I didn't think it was.
Well, as part of my research, there was a few comments I saw where it was like, this was one of the least regarded in Dubliners by critics and editors. So it wasn't like the most loved one from that anthology either. But then it fits in with the general theme, so.
Yeah.
So you didn't like any of the characters? Because I made a note about Villanova, who I didn't like, but then I found amusing, because he kind of came across as like the old-timey version of that insufferable forum troll who just thinks he knows it all. Like when Villanova starts pontificating on like, oh, and there was lutes in like the Romanticist paintings. I hated lutes. They didn't actually play lutes. I'm like, oh, he's one of those. So I had kind of fun with like their like little interactions, or how the French dudes all get to stay at the hotel, but like Villanova who's a Hungarian, and Jimmy stay at Jimmy's parents' house. Like,
yeah,
it was just, the little, which I thought was really funny, because like at the beginning it says that the Irishmen, that they were cheering on the French team in the race, and there was that line about how it was their friends the French. I'm like, their friends the French. And then in my research I found that it's because the Irish and the French had an affinity over their mutual animosity with the English. So
I'm feeling got at with this story.
I was gonna say, Gerald, do you feel personally attacked?
Is that why you don't like it? Yeah.
Not at all. Not at all. No. I like France and Ireland. I'm a man of the world, a man of Europe.
You go to France all the time with your caravan to reconquer it. Well, they never reconquer, but you know what I mean. To wage war.
That's what I do. Yeah. Not.
Yeah. I think so. The story does center around Jimmy the Irishman, and I thought of something when you were talking, Anais, about his self-destructiveness, and I feel that maybe that also could have been due to some internal feeling of inferiority and wanting to keep up appearances with the objectively wealthier individuals, but just trying to flash the money and stuff to be in their company.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think Jimmy is definitely. I think it's what he has, what people would describe as new money, whereas the others, I get the impression they're from old money, and they know how to behave and they know how to conduct themselves. And he's just throwing cash around because he thinks that's what you do when you have money.
And he thinks he has to in order to continue rubbing elbows.
Yeah.
Which to a certain degree is probably true, but still maybe don't do it.
I think they're probably, and I think they're entertaining him because he has got this cash and he is throwing it around, and I suspect that without that they'd drop him like a stone.
Mm-hmm. He knows that too. In the car, he thinks about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're like basically ignoring him. The two cousins are talking up in the front. He's in the back. Villanova's humming to himself. Where's the part where he like knows that they're only keeping him because of a small investment, which I thought was like he knows and he still. Yeah. But yeah.
I think also some of the writing didn't. I found some of the writing quite difficult to consume because I think he writes with a certain style, and I highlighted, I was just looking now, I highlighted one sentence where it says, "This knowledge had previously kept his bills within the limits of reasonable recklessness, and if he had been so conscious of the labour latent in money, whether it had been questioned merely of some freak of the higher intelligence, how much more so now when he was about to stake the greater part of his substance!" Exclamation mark. And I had to read that sentence about 3 or 4 times before I could begin to understand it. And I said before on the podcast, you know, I like a story to flow. I like to consume it and read it and not have to stop and go, oh, what does that mean? That's just me.
But that sentence tripped me up as well, and it reminded me of there's a criticism that we're actually getting more illiterate in this sense, like obviously not more illiterate in the sense that people can't read, but that so Joyce is famous for those sentences where you're just like, oh, I need to parse it. It's so right. So he's like famous for that. And there's this idea that because we don't read and write in this way anymore, and we use much simpler syntax, shorter sentences, that we've become a version of illiterates over time. So this sentence definitely made me feel that. I did have to read that one a few times, and I was like, what?
Yeah. I suppose that's the difference between reading an entertaining story, which you can enjoy and you can get things from, and reading a collection of sentences that sort of makes sense, but then you have to study it and work at it, and I don't like that. I'm talking myself into a lower score here.
Mine stayed the same. Reading it, I did research, I liked it more, but it doesn't make me rate the story higher. It just makes me be like, oh, no, that's fine. Also, it just made me appreciate how sassy James Joyce is in his stories, where he's just like reading the entire Irish people, just letting them know what he thinks.
So there.
Yeah. Was very short. I don't know if I have much more to say. Now that we talked about the prose, that was all I had left.
Yeah. Yeah. It wasn't. I mean, it was. How long was it? I think we've had. There's 2,200 words, so it's not that short a short story, but yeah, not a lot went on. Well, quite a lot went on, but it was just these rich people messing about.
Well, I don't think that's fair because it's not about the rich people messing about. Actually, one of the things I read was that there was another criticism that the way that James Joyce was portraying the rich was a little like ham-fisted and ridiculous. Like, do they really behave this way, or is this the way that James Joyce,
Well, it's not a normal weekday too. It's kind of like just after a race, and it's kind of like an after party, even though it wasn't a party specifically for the people affiliated with the race at all. But it's kind of like, they're in this kind of jubilant mood, just since the French team had gotten second and third place, and they were all rooting for the French team. So. And I think, and that makes me think of another thing that I liked about the story, is that even if you did no additional reading and did kind of just take it for what it had to offer at face value, I think it generally kind of puts you in a good mood. Even though I don't condone or endorse all the activities that they engaged in, it's like, some young folks, driving around having a good time. It kind of like, it's nice.
So there was a happy ending, was there, Rami?
I mean, I wasn't as focused on Jimmy having lost all his or a lot of his money, but I guess that could be one negative. But just people having fun and staying up until the dawn the next day, just enjoying themselves.
Yeah.
Good times.
Yeah. I guess.
So are we ready to rate?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's short podcast. This
Okay. It is short podcast. We got 20 minutes of discussion.
I'll edit this one.
You're what?
I'll edit this one. I'll go. I'm sorry, James Joyce lovers. It's a 3 for me.
Okay. Rami?
4.
All right, and I'm 4.5 somehow. Higher than Rami. Okay.
Nice.
Yeah, maybe I did give it half a point just for James Joyce sassiness.
Yes. Oh, good.
So, game and submissions.
Which one? Submissions first, then game.
Yep.
Yeah. I'll submit The Trial for Murder by Charles Dickens.
Okay.
Out of my comfort zone.
And recently, I've been re-engaging with Colette Sartor on Facebook. Do you guys remember we read La Cuesta Encantada, and Maya and I loved it, and Rami and Gerald didn't love it? And for listeners who are wondering, where's Maya? Maya is going to be back, and I think in 2 weeks she'll be back. But yeah, so I want to read another Colette Sartor story because I remember loving it. So, Once Removed by Colette Sartor is in the Chicago Tribune's Printers Row Journal.
Nice. So who can guess what today's quiz is about?
If it's Irish independence.
No, it's either Ireland or cars. And I
Cars, racing.
Cars. Yeah.
Yes. Good job. Gerald
Really?
always gets it. Yeah.
Oh, no.
But it was a little tricky to find a good quiz because I didn't want it to focus on one particular race. And also I didn't want it to be biased by including only American races. So I think it is still mostly American at the end of the day, but I think there's a fair shot for both of you. And that you're not going to know any of these answers.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see. Who do we start with? But it's multiple choice. I'll start with Gerald.
Okay.
Okay. There have been a few drivers fortunate enough to win one Indy 500 auto race. There have been a select few that have won it more than once. Which of the following drivers did not win 4 Indy 500 races in their career?
Okay.
Al Unser Sr., AJ Foyt, Bobby Unser, or Rick Mears?
Rick Mears.
No, it was Bobby Unser.
Was it? Oh. Okay.
I don't know any of these names.
No, I know the names. Yeah.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, Anais.
Yeah.
It is hard in today's world to be able to race more than one type of car. Who was the first driver to win the Indy 500, the Daytona 500, and the 24 Hours of Le Mans in their career? Mark Donohue, AJ Foyt, Mario Andretti, or Dan Gurney?
Mario Andretti.
Good guess, but it was actually AJ Foyt.
Really?
He was the first, yeah. Okay.
I guessed that. Okay.
Gerald. To win one Indy 500 is very tough. To win 2 in a row is incredible. Which of the following drivers won 2 Indy 500 races in a row? Bill Vukovich Sr., Parnelli Jones, Rick Mears, or Gordon Johncock?
I'll go with Rick Mears.
Oh, again, it was Bill Vukovich Sr. And let me just tell you a bit of background on this because I found it quite interesting. So he won the race in 1953 and 1954. The year before his first win in 1952, he was leading the race, but then a small part broke with a few laps left in the race, so he didn't win that one. And then in 1955, after he won the 2 in a row, he was killed while leading the race. So had things gone differently, he could have won 4 in a row. and possibly lived longer. But anyway, Anais. We sometimes see drivers spraying champagne while celebrating a victory at races. After being victorious in the 1967 24 Hours of Le Mans, which driver started the tradition of spraying champagne on the winner's podium instead of drinking it? Was it Dan Gurney, Jimmy Clark, Mario Andretti, or Graham Hill?
Clark?
Gurney. I was thinking I should have maybe given only 3 choices to improve your odds. Anyway, it's okay because there's the tiebreaker at the end. All right. There have been, Gerald, there have been a few drivers that have won more than one NASCAR championship. Which of the following NASCAR drivers never won more than one season driver championship? We have Terry Labonte, Rusty Wallace, Darrell Waltrip, or Jeff Gordon?
Rusty Wallace.
Correct.
Wow.
Don't look so confused. You were surprised, weren't you?
Was that a guess, or I mean, you kind of seemed confident about it.
It was a guess.
Okay. All right, Anais.
Mm-hmm.
Most people. Oh shoot! I just realized I'll only ask 8 questions. Yeah, because I had 9 prepared. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Where was I? Oh yeah. Most people know one man as the king in NASCAR. Richard Petty started 1,185 NASCAR races in his career, driving in the Grand National known as the Cup, now known as the Cup Division.
Mm-hmm.
How many top 5 finishes did he earn? All right, top 5. 555, 333, 909, or 43?
333?
555.
Wow.
That was close again.
I was like, let me go with a good batting average. That's what I. Wow. Wow. 909 was way too much.
Nice thinking.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Gerald?
Yes.
Some records are made that might be unbreakable. This winning record could well be one of them. Which driver was the first to have won 14 season championships competing in an NHRA professional category? Don Garlitz, Don Prudhomme, Bob Glidden, or John Force?
And I like drag racing. It's either Prudhomme or Garlitz. Prudhomme.
No, it was John Force.
Really? Oh, okay.
I think so. You're having me second guess myself.
No.
I think it was. Anyway. Okay, last question for you, Anais.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Versatility is a great talent to have for a race car driver. Some were very gifted in that regard. Who was the first auto racing driver to accomplish winning the Indy 500, Daytona 500, and Formula One championship? Nigel Mansell, Dan Gurney, Richard Petty, or Mario Andretti?
Mario Andretti.
Yes! Oh, I was hoping you'd get it. Yep.
Oh.
Good. Okay, so tiebreaker. And I'm going to give you a clue because to kind of help you zone in on your narrow down your guesses. So in a previous question to Anais, we said that Richard Petty, he had how many top 5 finishes?
555.
555, right. So keeping that in mind, how many races did Richard Petty win in his career?
Okay.
We'll take guesses.
I would say
333.
No, not that many. I would say, I'll have a good guess. I'll say 140.
140. And Gerald wins because the correct answer is an even 200.
Oh, okay. Very good.
Yep, so what are we reading?
We shall be reading The Trial for Murder by Charles Dickens.
Okay,
Nice.
but before you go, send yourself to the prestigious comment section at literaryroadhouse.com and rub elbows with us. Want to broadcast to the world that you roll with impressive people? We can't help you there because we're book nerds, but you should still follow us on Twitter at LitRoadhouse so we can roll with cool people like you. Have you spent all your money on card games and now want to take a little time to yourself to evaluate your life choices? Join Literary Roadhouse Book Club, a monthly show that discusses full fiction novels. And finally, we, like Jimmy, are aspirational. Help us climb the podcast social economic ladder at patreon.com/literary roadhouse. Every bit helps. And as always, share this podcast with a Hungarian who hates loots in your life. Until next time, read a good story.